Margaret Chen stood at gate 47, her hands trembling as she gripped her daughter's small suitcase. 7-year-old Emma stood beside her, clutching the teddy bear her father had given her last Christmas, back when things were still tolerable. Margaret was 52 years old, though lately she felt ancient. 23 years of marriage to Richard had worn her down like water on stone. The angry words, the cold silences, the way he made her feel small in her own home. But today was different. Today she'd finally found the courage to leave. Her sister lived in Portland. Margaret had booked 2 tickets, a fresh start on the other side of the country. Emma didn't understand everything, but she'd stopped asking why Daddy wasn't coming. Flight 2847 to Seattle now boarding at gate 47. Margaret's heart stopped. Seattle? She looked down at her boarding pass, then up at the gate display. How had she made such a mistake? In her haste and fear, she'd walked to the wrong gate entirely. Her Portland flight was 3 gates down, and according to the departures board, it had just closed its doors. Tears welled in her eyes. She'd used nearly all her savings for these tickets. There was no money for rebooking, no plan B. Richard would be home from his business trip tomorrow. If she didn't leave now, "Ma'am, you need to board." The gate agent was looking at her expectantly. Margaret made a split-second decision. Seattle was in the Pacific Northwest, too. She could figure something out once they landed. Anywhere was better than going back. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered to Emma, and they hurried down the jetway. The plane was nearly full. Margaret found their seats, 17B and 17C, in the middle of the aircraft. As she helped Emma into the window seat, she noticed the man already seated in 17A. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with silver-gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, and there was something immediately calm about his presence. "Hello there," he said warmly to Emma. "Is that your bear?" Emma nodded shyly, hugging the toy closer. "He looks very brave," the man continued. "I bet he's an excellent traveler." Margaret settled into her seat, trying to compose herself. She could feel the tears still threatening. Everything she owned was in 2 small suitcases in the overhead bin. She had no plan, no destination now, just the desperate need to be anywhere but home. As the plane taxied, the man beside her pulled out a book, something about woodworking, but he didn't open it. Instead, he glanced over with gentle concern. "Forgive me for noticing," he said quietly, "but you seem troubled. I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Foster." Margaret hesitated. She'd spent so many years keeping up appearances, pretending everything was fine, but something about this stranger's genuine kindness broke through her defenses. "I'm Margaret. This is Emma." She paused, then added softly, "I boarded the wrong plane." Daniel raised his eyebrows but didn't look alarmed. "Where were you meant to go?" "Portland." "To my sister's." Margaret felt a tear slip down her cheek. "I can't afford another ticket. I used everything I had." Emma was gazing out the window as the plane lifted into the sky, oblivious to her mother's quiet distress. Daniel was silent for a moment, then spoke with a measured thoughtfulness that came from years of living. "Well, Seattle's a beautiful city. I've lived there 40 years, raised my kids there after my wife passed." "I'm so sorry," Margaret said automatically. "Thank you." It was a long time ago, they were just little then. "But we built a good life, the 3 of us." He smiled at the memory. "They're grown now. My daughter Rachel is a teacher. My son runs a bookshop." There was something soothing about the way Daniel talked. No rush, no judgment, just the easy sharing of a life well lived. "May I ask," he said gently, "are you running from something or toward something?" Margaret looked at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "Both, I suppose." "Mostly from my husband." She stopped, unsure how much to say. "You don't have to explain," Daniel said. "I taught high school English for 35 years. You learn to recognize when someone's carrying too heavy a load." The plane leveled off, and a flight attendant began the beverage service. Daniel waited until she'd pass, then turned back to Margaret. "I retired 5 years ago," he said. "These days I do some carpentry, volunteer at the library, spend time with my grandkids. Simple things. But it took me a long time to understand that simple is enough. Sometimes simple is everything." Margaret found herself telling him things she'd never spoken aloud. About Richard's temper, about feeling invisible in her own marriage, about how she'd planned this escape for months, saving $20 here and there from the grocery money. Daniel listened without interrupting, the way people rarely do anymore. "You know what I've learned?" he said finally. "The bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves, not in a selfish way, but in a survival way. My wife used to say that you can't pour from an empty cup." Emma had fallen asleep against the window, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. "She's beautiful," Daniel said. "You're giving her an important gift, showing her that it's okay to walk away from what hurts us." They talked for the rest of the flight. Daniel told her about his late wife, Susan, who died of cancer when she was just 38. About the fear and loneliness of single parenting. About the small miracles that had carried them through. "I had a neighbor," he said, "Mrs. Patterson. She was 76 years old, and she brought us dinner 3 nights a week for 2 years. She couldn't fix what was broken, but she made sure we weren't hungry. Sometimes kindness is just showing up." As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Daniel pulled out his wallet and handed Margaret a business card with his daughter's name and number. "Rachel has a spare room," he said. "She's always looking for boarders, helps with her mortgage. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. Tell her I sent you." Margaret stared at the card, overwhelmed. I can't just—" "You can," Daniel said firmly but kindly. "And you will. When we land, I'm going to help you figure out your next steps. I have some connections, people who help women in your situation. Job placement services, legal aid. You're not alone in this." "Why would you help me?" Margaret whispered. "You don't even know me." Daniel smiled, and there was a depth of understanding in his eyes. "Someone helped me once when I needed it most. A stranger at a grocery store saw me trying to buy diapers with an expired credit card, 3 crying kids in tow. He paid for my entire cart and walked away before I could thank him properly. I've spent 40 years trying to pass that kindness forward." He paused, then added, "Besides, I'm retired with too much time on my hands. My kids keep telling me I need a project." Emma stirred awake as the wheels touched down. Margaret held her daughter close, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: hope. True to his word, Daniel spent the afternoon helping Margaret navigate her unexpected arrival in Seattle. He drove them to Rachel's house, a cozy bungalow with a garden that needed tending. Rachel welcomed them with the same gentle warmth as her father. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became an unlikely friend and mentor. He connected Margaret with a women's support group, helped her find a job at a local community center, and taught Emma how to make a birdhouse in his workshop. "You know," Margaret said one Saturday afternoon, watching Emma carefully sand a piece of wood under Daniel's patient instruction, "I got on the wrong plane." Daniel looked up from the workbench and smiled. Or maybe it was exactly the right one. Margaret thought about that. About how one small mistake, or perhaps fate, had led her to this kind stranger. About how the worst day of her life had somehow transformed into a new beginning. "My wife used to say," Daniel continued, "that we're all just walking each other home. Sometimes the path isn't what we expected, but if we're lucky, we meet people along the way who remind us we're not meant to walk it alone." Emma held up her birdhouse proudly. "Look, Mama, Mr. Daniel says birds will live in it." As the afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows, Margaret realized she was exactly where she needed to be. Not Portland, not back home, but here, in this moment, surrounded by sawdust and kindness, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. Sometimes, the wrong flight takes you exactly where you need to go. Sometimes, a stranger becomes the person who saves you. And sometimes, the journey home is simply about finding people who remind you that you were never truly lost, just temporarily off